Hi and welcome back to my channel. Today's going to be a short video because I've noticed recently the views of my company car versus cash allowance versus salary sacrifice has been quite high, which is great. So thank you very much for watching. But on the back of that and the obvious interest in the subject, I've put together an Excel sheet to allow you to make direct personalised comparisons between the three methods of sourcing a car. So I'm going to share that with you in a moment. I'll talk you through how it works and then I will make it available to you via Dropbox absolutely free of charge. The only thing I ask in exchange is if you could like this video and please subscribe to my channel. It lets me know that people are interested in what I'm doing and obviously justifies putting time in. In the meantime though, let's start with the opening sequence. Okay, so essentially treat this video as a user guide for the Excel sheet. So I'm going to share my screen now and we'll jump straight in and I will talk you through it cell by cell. So here we go. Okay, so as you can see, it's a relatively straightforward color-coded Excel sheet. There's lots of formulas happening in the background, but from a completion point of view, it's really straightforward for you to make a very simple like-for-like comparison. So I've separated it into company car, where I'll ask you for various bits of data, car allowance, salary sacrifice, where there's a bit more data, and then down at the bottom, you'll get a comparison for how these actually compare financially. But I'll talk you through section by section. So starting from the top, that is your only instruction, complete the yellow cells only. I have locked the other cells, but once you download this document off Dropbox, then just save a copy, and then if you want to unlock it, you can. There's no password. Though I'd suggest you probably don't play with the formulas too much because right now it works. But right, so first and foremost then, starting at the very top, is your personal tax bracket. So you'll know what your tax bracket is based on your salary. So bear in mind, you must move on to self-assessment if you opt out and take the car allowance to claim tax back on business mileage. That's important because the calculations do take that into account a little bit later on. But yeah, choose your personal tax bracket. The cells here, if it's just a case of entering data, then it gives you the option to just enter data. If it's a fixed outcome, then you've got a drop-down menu. So your tax brackets are either 20%, 40% or 50%. So if I choose 40%, and then business mileage and personal mileage per year, you need to be really honest with this because if you put a false figure, your calculations are a bit meaningless. So really think about what mileage you anticipate doing. If you take a personal lease with a car allowance, or if you take salary sacrifice and get a lease, then obviously you need to take into account that some of these leases will have mileage limits. So you might find that you can't do above a certain amount without incurring additional charges, which I've not taken into account in this. It would just get overly complicated. So I'm going to work on, let's do 12,000 business miles, so 1,000 a month, and then let's do 3,000 personal miles. Now the reason I've chosen that is a lot of company car, well, a lot of leases, have one of the options as 15,000 miles per year. They generally tend to be like 5,000, 10,000, 15, 20, etc. So let's put 15 as a nice round number. So the company car. Now I put in this cell, by the way, where it says Tesla Model 3 long range. You can put what you want in it. It's not attached to any formula. It's just for your reference, just so you can maybe recall what you're looking at if you're making comparisons on the like for likes or something. So write what you like in there. I put the long range Tesla Model 3 in. Next thing on there is the P11D list price value of the car. Now if you Google P11D list price and then make sure you write down the very specific model you're looking at, so it's not just a BMW 520, it's a BMW 520 M Sport Auto. You know, you've got to search very specifically, and then that will give you the list price of the car that you'll be taxed against. You can't negotiate it. That is the price the government use. For this particular car, the Tesla Model 3 long range, as of today, which is the 20th of December 2021, that car is retailing for £49,990 from Tesla. And then you do have to put in there car register, whether it was before or after 6th of April 2020. As you can see, it's another drop-down menu. The reason for that is it does affect the benefit in kind percentage. There is a slight change based on if the car was registered before then. Next one, it's a super important cell, is the CO2 emissions, so grams per kilometre. When you search for the P11D of that specific car, you'll almost certainly be able to find the CO2 emissions as well. And again, it's a drop-down menu. So you need to choose anything from 0, which means it's an electric car, no emissions, to 1 to 50, which means it's almost certainly a hybrid. And the hybrids, it will show you what electric range it has. That means how far it can go using electric alone, in which case you need to choose the appropriate one. And then once you get the emissions above 51, then these are the different brackets. You need to find out where your car sits and choose accordingly. Goes right up to 170 plus grams per kilometre for your real gas guzzlers. And you'll see, if you look at this cell at the minute where it says 1% moving to 2% next year, if I change that to 170, suddenly it jumps to 37%. So it's a really big deal making sure you get the car with the right emissions. If you haven't already watched my other video on car allowance versus salary sacrifice versus company car, please take the time to watch it because it explains benefit in kind and how all this works. So anyway, we're looking at an electric car, which means it's 0. So it stays at 1% this current tax year, and then on April 1st next year it goes up to 2%, where it actually stays until 2026. Anything that's set in the tax year 23-24, they've now confirmed is going to run for the following 2 years without change, which is good to know. Type of propulsion, so you need to choose from the drop-down menu if it's electric, petrol, hybrid, diesel or diesel hybrid. The reason for this is because diesel cars attract a 4% increase on your benefit in kind just for being diesel. So if I click on it, look, the 1% has become 5%, the 2 has become 6, etc. But it doesn't affect diesel hybrids. So it's important that you choose the right one from there. To be fair, it's pretty much diesel or anything else. But I've separated there just so you can specify accordingly. Below that, you need to put the average fuel cost. So pound per litre if you're putting petrol or diesel in, or pounds per kilowatt if it's an electric car and you're charging it. So that can be, for example, if I'm charging at home, my rate here is 16 pence per kilowatt. So that's what I'll put in. So that's my average fuel. And then over here alongside it, you've got the average miles per gallon or miles per kilowatt. Tesla Model 3 does about 4 miles per kilowatt, but at the same time, I'm realizing at the moment that in winter it's not quite as efficient. So I'm going to put 3.5. Now, what it's immediately done is worked out that 3.5 going into 16 pence means it's costing about 5 pence per mile. So that's what that formula does. And that's important, the cost per mile, because it allows you to see whether or not you are losing money or gaining money when you get reimbursed by your company. Which brings me to this. So method of mileage payment or reimbursement. There are two options, either business, which is you pay for all the fuel and claim business miles for your employer. So that means you just pay for the cost of your private mileage and you declare how many business miles and they reimburse you at whatever rate they work to. And we'll come to that in a second. Or alternatively, you've got personal, which is where your employer pays for all your fuel and charges you for personal miles. So maybe they give you a fuel card if you're using a petrol or diesel. And so you just use that to pay for everything. And then you declare your personal mileage and then they bill you for the personal miles. So business is where you declare the business miles and get paid for them. Personal is where they pay for all the fuel and they bill you for personal miles. So that's the difference between the two, which then comes down to the all-important company reimbursement rate. So this is company reimbursement, personal or business per mile. That's just gone off the screen there. But what you need to do then is then figure out, based on which car you choose, which will generally be dictated by the engine size, what the company reimbursement rate. Most companies will use what the government dictate. So, for example, if your car, I think at the moment the rate is, and it changes all the time, so do check it, don't take my word for it. If the car is more than 2 litres, then I think it's 11 pence per mile. If it's below 2 litres, I think it's 10 pence per mile. And if it's an electric car, it's just 4 pence per mile. So if I put in 0.04 pounds, so 4 pence, you can see there that if that's the reimbursement rate, and this affects all the formulas when you take into account your mileage, you see about whether or not how many business miles and how many personal miles you're doing. But immediately I can see that the cost per mile of the vehicle is 5 pence and the company is reimbursing me at 4 pence. Or at least they would be if I was you would do it on the business option of these two drop downs. Because I'm on the personal one, it means that the company will pay for that cost of fuel, so it doesn't really matter anymore. And all I know is that every personal mile I do will cost 4 pence. And that's it. And just to jump to the bottom, so it's 4 pence per personal mile, that is what I've put. We put 3,000 miles in, so therefore, if I scroll down to cost of personal mileage, it's just £120, and the business mileage is 0. So annual cost of business miles is nothing because the company's paying for all the fuel. I'm just declaring private miles and they're billing me. So £120 is 3,000 times by 4 pence. So that is the company car section. So let's come down to the car allowance now. Now, I put BMW 520d in because that was the last car that I personally leased, but there's nothing stopping you buying a car if you take the car allowance. That's the beauty of the car allowance. So let's say you wanted to buy a BMW 520d. Let's start with, and said, remember, you just key in whatever you want in that cell. From the car allowance, from the company point of view, only you know what that is if you're lucky enough to have the option. I imagine most typically tend to sit maybe at like £600 per month. Bear in mind this is pre-tax. You will pay normal tax on it at the rate that you chose at the top of the screen. So let's say £600, so £7,200 a year. And let's look at not a diesel, because diesels are not super efficient. Let's look at a 520 M Sport, so a petrol. So if I jump to, so I've chosen petrol, average fuel, I think petrol, I've not bought petrol in a little while because I've got the Tesla. I think it's about £1.40, I think. So if I put £1.40 per litre, and then average miles per gallon of a 520 M Sport, I'd have to check, but I would imagine it probably sit at maybe 40 optimistically. So I'll put 40 because I'm an optimist. That means your cost per mile is 16 pence, but because it's a 2 litre, I think it's just below it. I think it's like 1,988 cc or something, which would put it in the 10 pence bracket. That means that company reimbursement would be 10 pence per mile. Bear in mind, if you've got a car allowance and it's your car, then they are definitely not paying for your fuel. You're paying for everything, and then you're declaring your business miles and then getting reimbursed for it. But it's not just what you get from the company. Don't look at that and immediately think, you know, it's costing 16 pence, I'm only getting 10 pence, this is not going to work in my favour. In reality, there are other things to consider, because there's a tax payback that you get based on declaring business mileage once you go into self-assessment. So what that means is, because you pay obviously tax on what you're earning, when you declare business mileage over and above what the company pay you, the government has a rate of 45 pence per mile for the first 10,000 miles, and then 25 pence per mile for everything over and above that they recommend paying to people who are running their own car. Car allowances don't tend to work that way because you're not running your own car, they're giving you an allowance to pay for it. So therefore, very few companies will pay you that, but you can take that into account when you're doing your self-assessment. So what I mean by that is, if I did say 10,000 miles and my company reimbursed me at 10 pence per mile, the difference between the government rate of 45p and my 10p is 35p. I can use the self-assessment form and claim the tax back on that 35p. So therefore, you know, your reimbursement rate actually jumps up quite a bit. So don't feel that that's completely against you. It's really not. But you need to do the self-assessment or you just won't get that money. So moving down, company car, finance, loan payments. I would imagine a 520 M Sport, if you bought one that was, say, 2 years old, I think you'd probably get away with buying one of those for maybe 30,000. Maybe current market things are quite high, but let's say 30,000. In which case, monthly car finance, loan payments, we could approximate that you could probably do that on finance for about £600 a month, I would imagine. This is down for you to tweak, and if these figures are way off because the market's really escalate at the moment, then I apologise. Play with it yourself. You know, put your own forms in, your own numbers in, and see how it works. Insurance obviously depends on your age, points, all those elements, but let's make a nice round £500 figure. And road tax on a 520 M Sport, I wouldn't be surprised if it's maybe like £150 or something. It's going to be a couple of quid because petrol emissions are inevitably a bit higher and road tax is based on emissions. Servicing costs, if it was a BMW, I would imagine you probably end up at about £400 per year at a guess. And then annual cost tyres, if it was an M Sport, you're probably on 19 or 20-inch wheels. They're going to be about 300 quid a corner. Let's assume at 15,000 miles a year, you're replacing 2 a year on average. So therefore, that's probably about £600 per year just on tyres. And there will be inevitably things over and above that, like the cost of oil, the cost of your windscreen wipers, if you damage it at all, and all these different factors. But I'm going to leave it at 600 just so we've got a working figure. And then on to salary sacrifice. Now, this is a longer section to complete, but at the same time, you have to take into account all these factors, so it does take a little bit longer to fill in. So if I look at this, so I've keyed in the Tesla Model 3 long range because companies will almost certainly be able to get you a good deal on this. Now remember, said if you've watched my other video, if you're not, then please do go and watch it. This makes much more sense if you have. The other video will highlight, of course, that when you take a salary sacrifice, you have to lease a car. You can't buy it. The salary sacrifice is the company paying for a lease on your behalf for you to be able to then choose whichever car you want. So you're never going to own it, but we'll talk about that as the pros and cons in a little while. But a Tesla Model 3 is going to be really appealing because it's good for the environment, and customers, your employers will like to be associated with being good for the environment. So the P11D value of the car we already know from up here is 49,990. Not registered before 6th of April because it's new. CO2 emissions are 0 because it's electric. It's the same drop-down menu as above, by the way. Type of propulsion, let's put it into electric. This does matter here because the benefit in kind does matter on this section. So if you do choose a diesel, you will see that increase on your benefit in kind. Average fuel, what did I put? So 16 pence. And we put that I was getting 3.5 miles per kilowatt. Come to reimbursement rate on this. So this is, if you have a salary sacrifice, then you will be able to expense business mileage. So therefore, you'll get paid back at whatever rate. Being an electric car, let's assume they follow the government guidelines, it's 4 pence. And so you can immediately look at that and go, okay, this is all exactly the same as in the company car section. But at the end of the day, the car isn't being given to you by the company, you are leasing it, which means you will have to make payments. Now, the monthly car lease payments, working on the assumption, obviously, the fact that these come from pre-tax is great, so you're saving your tax anyway, and national insurance. But you've got to bear in mind that the Tesla Model 3 long range is quite an expensive car. I looked earlier, and if you were to personally lease this car to do 10,000 miles per year, keep it for 3 years and not put a deposit down, it was £992 a month. So it's quite a chunk of money. So let's assume that your company can negotiate that in some way. That was direct from Tesla, so I don't know how well they do, but let's go with 800. It's going to be high. There's no two ways about it, this kind of level of car. There are cheaper options. You could go for a Nissan Leaf or one of the VWs, like the ID3 or ID4. But if we base it on this example, just for a like-for-like, annual insurance, in most cases when it's a lease you would probably have to pay it, but if it's a company lease through salary sacrifice, the company car, if they have company cars as well, there's a good chance they may well actually have a company insurance policy. You'd have to check that, but let's assume they don't and put £500 to insure it, because in most cases you would have to insure the car. Road tax you wouldn't pay because it's a lease. Servicing costs, almost certainly you wouldn't pay because they'll be included in the lease. And likewise, if the company has negotiated particularly well on your behalf, they could probably include annual costs for things like tyres and things. So let's leave that at naught as well. I said, and you need to adapt this for your personal circumstances. You need to speak to your employers. Your HR department will understand exactly what they will or won't include, and then you can fill in the boxes yourself. But obviously, it said this is just an example to illustrate how it works. And then as you scroll down, you get the maths, you get the important bit. So what does this mean? So if I look at the company car and car allowance, salary sacrifice, these are the columns that we're going through, the rows that we're going down. So first of all is the annual cost of the business mileage after company reimbursement. So for a company car, it's 0. At the end of the day, the company will almost certainly be paying for your fuel and then just billing you for private mileage. If you change that on the drop-down menu, so from personal to business, and if we scroll back down, you'll see that now you're incurring a business mileage cost and you are incurring the cost of private mileage in full to yourself, but at the actual cost of running the car, not the reimbursement rate. So total mileage cost will be £205.71. But if I change it back to personal, then it's at 120. So it's definitely advantageous to try and get a fuel card and just get billed for the private mileage. The next one down there, so I said annual cost of private mileage and then the combined cost of the two. So company car, really straightforward. All you're paying for is the private mileage at 4 pence in the case of the Tesla at 4p per mile. If you've got the car allowance, bear in mind what information we put in. We put in that it's £1.40, it's a petrol. It's giving 40 miles per gallon. Company's reimbursing at 10 pence for business mileage, not for personal mileage, and it's costing about 16 pence per mile. So that means it's going to cost about £709 to do, remember, 12,000 business miles. so £709, and then £477 for the private mileage. Now, obviously, you're doing a lot more business miles, but those numbers aren't that far apart. That's because you are getting paid a car allowance mileage rate. So combined cost of doing the 15,000 miles in that car would be £1,186.70p. On top of that, on the salary sacrifice, you have again, we went with the Tesla on this, so it's electric, and the miles per gallon, or miles per kilowatt in this case, 3.5. So the cost of business mileage, which you would get reimbursed at 4 pence, means that it actually only costs you about £68.57p for the year in business mileage, and your private mileage would cost you £137.14 because you're paying the actual running cost of the car, as opposed to the company car one, which is a fixed reimbursement rate. You know, that's what they bill you at 4 pence per mile in this case. Whereas that's costing that times by the 3,000 that we put at the top. So total running cost for the 15,000 there is £205.71p. That's not necessarily just highlighting the benefit in salary sacrifice, that's highlighting the benefit of an electric car. And then you've got the running costs. So if you have the car allowance, your running costs are £1,650 in this case, which is the loan payment, plus the annual insurance, plus the road tax, plus the servicing, plus the tyres. So that totals £1,650. For a company car, that's zero. There's no running costs. You incur none. And then the salary sacrifice, the only one we put on, if you recall, was the annual insurance, which is where the £500 comes from. Next, you're on to the actual costs of buying it or running it or leasing it. Company car, none. It's not your car. So therefore, there are no running costs. From the car allowance, we put that this car was going to cost £600 per month. 12 times 600 is £7,200. Those are your annual purchase costs. On the salary sacrifice, now this is slightly more complicated, but just to explain how this works. So the 5,760, that's relatively straightforward in terms of the fact that what that's actually costing you is 12 times 800, which is your monthly payments, and 9,600, and then you take off your 40% tax, because had you not taken the salary sacrifice, you would have been paid £5,760 after tax for something for wages that were £9,200, or was it £9,600 before tax? I hope that makes sense. I'll explain it on the next slide, on the next box down here. So basically, what you've saved here is there. So your £9,600 that you would have earned before tax was then netted down to 5,760 had you taken it as wages, or because you gave it up as salary sacrifice, you've made £9,600 worth of payments towards the car, and therefore you've saved £3,840 worth of tax, basically. So it's worth doing. There's no two ways about it. Salary sacrifice is massively beneficial. And then you've got the benefit in kind. So for a company car, this is the one thing you do pay. So the benefit in kind is based on the value of the car multiplied by the emissions multiplied by your tax rate. And that also applies on the salary sacrifice. Now, if you watch my other video, said if you've already seen it, fantastic, you'll know what I'm talking about. If you haven't, please do, because this will make more sense. When you take salary sacrifice, you have to pay either, whichever is highest, the benefit in kind on the car you lease, or the tax that you gave up, unless you take an electric car, which is here, whichever is highest, except when your car has less than 75 gram per kilometre emissions, in which case only the benefit in kind is payable. Sorry, the font's just dropped in size. So in which case here, you would just pay that, the 33327, which gives you your grand totals. Oh, actually, sorry, no, just to touch on this. So reimbursement, the only one that gets reimbursement is car allowance if you do, obviously, one, you'll get money from the company. So that car allowance that we put in there, which was £600, so that's £7,200 in total. But after you've paid your tax at 40% and national insurance at 2%, that brings it down to £4,176. That's what you'll actually take home of that car allowance. And then that reimbursement rate that I talked about when you do your self-assessment from Her Majesty's Revenues and Customs gives you another £1,520 back in your pocket, or they adjust your tax rate so that you just don't pay tax on £1,520 worth. So therefore, you do get that money back. So that's included in the formulas. So what does it cost? So if we look at that Tesla, going back to the top, doing that mileage, and with the 4 pence reimbursement rate for personal miles, total cost is £453 per year, or £37.77 per month, to do 15,000 miles a year, 3/4 of which would be, 4/5 of which would be business miles, and the other 3,000 would be personal miles. Now, on the car allowance section, the example we went with was that BMW. That would cost you £4,340 per year, even taking into account your car allowance and everything. So £361 per month. And then the salary sacrifice based on that Tesla at £800 per month, with you incurring no other costs apart from insurance. That would cost you £6,798.98p, or 6,799, or £566.58 per month. Now, obviously, when you look at that, it kind of makes it a bit of an easy choice that, okay, well, you'd go with a company car if you get offered one. And if you can choose the right car for you on your company car list, you're absolutely right. You should definitely go for that. If you're looking at the opportunity to be able to salary sacrifice or just buy your own car outright, bear in mind, if you bought that same car not through the salary sacrifice, then you would incur the insurance, you would incur road tax, you would incur the servicing costs and the annual costs, because you'd either have to pay them or they'd be part of your lease package, in which case you'd pay more per month. So bear in mind, and of course you would have paid the full tax on that money that you earned. So you are definitely much better off doing salary sacrifice versus nothing, versus just getting paid and buying a car. And then car allowance sits in the middle. So there are distinct advantages to the car allowance, which I'll touch on in a moment, but from a cost point of view, as I said, it depends what car you choose. If you choose a really small car that costs very little, you can make money. If you choose a really expensive car, it's going to cost you more. Which brings you on to the pros and cons. I've laid these out as the pros in the top boxes, cons in the bottom. So company car, pros, no maintenance or depreciation costs, no concerns about mileage, and no unforeseen costs at any time. Downside of them might be a limited choice. Don't know how many cars you've got to choose from for your company car list. Any tax payment you make is dead money. It's gone, and you get nothing for it apart from the car. And then you've also got no personal insurance history, because you're not insuring it yourself. You're not building any no claims bonus up. Going into the whole tax payments are dead money. Obviously, if it's an electric car, your tax payments are really low. That's not that big a deal. Personal car. Biggest plus is that it's a potential final asset if you purchase as opposed to lease. If you lease, you're never going to own it, in which case it's no different than a company car, and it's just money that you're paying and you're never going to see a return on it. But if you buy a car, then you own it. And if you own it, providing your payments are higher than the depreciation, otherwise you've got the risk of negative equity, you own a car and the company has bought it for you, and you can sell it at some point and that money is yours to keep. The great thing, of course, with the personal car going through the cash allowance is, of course, you've got an unlimited choice. You can choose what you want. It's just down to how much debt you're willing to incur, I suppose. And of course, you can change the car whenever you like, unless you're on a lease. Lease agreements offer fixed periods of time. You are stuck with it for the end of it. But if you buy it, you can sell it whenever you like. Downsides, you've got to pay for it. Ongoing maintenance costs. Unless you add these elements to a lease, if you buy a car, you will be insuring it, servicing it, taxing it, replacing the tyres, windscreen wipers, oil, everything. The cost of insurance, so you will incur inevitably the cost of insuring the car if you buy one, or if you personal lease, and in most cases you're probably still going to incur it. But you do at least build up a no claims history, so it will get less and less the longer you've kept it. And mileage anxiety, don't underestimate that one. If it's a personal car, you'll be super aware that every mile is depreciating it. And if it's a lease car, as I mentioned earlier, they have mileage limits. So you'll always be anxious about not exceeding it. So you need to be really conscious of that. And then salary sacrifice, big plus, it's cheaper than spending your post-tax salary on a car. It just is. You are saving the tax on that money right up front. You can choose pretty much any car, though keep the emissions low. Again, sorry, the font's gone off screen. And remember, the negotiating power of your company is working for you. They can probably negotiate on your half to get a better deal. Plus, they'll also pay the deposit because company cars, when they take a lease or companies take a lease, they sort out all those initial payments, which is really good. The downside of the salary sacrifice is it has to be a lease. You can't use the salary sacrifice to buy a car. It has to be a lease, which means you'll never own it. If you want a car with high emissions, then it can work out to be quite expensive. Going back to what I said before, you either pay the tax you've missed out on or the benefit in kind, whichever's the highest. If you go for a gas guzzling diesel with really high emissions of 170 plus grams per kilometre, you'll almost certainly get hammered on the benefit in kind. It will cost you more than if you just took the money, paid tax on it and bought the car yourself, as I outlined in my other video. And then last but not least, you are liable for fines on any damages or excess mileage. It's worth bearing that in mind. As I said, it's the nature of a lease car, whether you take the cash allowance and lease it or if you take salary sacrifice. If there's any damage to the car, they will bill you. If you exceed the mileage, they will bill you. You need to take these things into account. So yeah, that's it. I hope the document's really useful. As I said, the link to it, I've put it in Dropbox. You can have it absolutely free. The only thing I ask for in return is please like this video and give me a subscription. The more subscribers I get, the more I know that the things that I'm creating are actually worthwhile and people are interested, and I'll keep creating them, in which case you benefit. So please, said as a thank you, if you find it useful, just make sure you like and subscribe below. So I hope you find this guide really, really useful and it helps you make an educated decision when you're choosing your options between company car, personal car or salary sacrifice. Thanks again for watching. I hope you'll watch future videos, and again, don't forget, like, subscribe. Thanks so much. Take care. Bye-bye.